the mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony, air quotes nippy, Ames.
And this is A Little Bit Culty, a podcast about what happens when things that seem like a great thing at first go bad.
Every week, we chat with survivors, experts, and whistleblowers for real cult stories told directly by the people who lived through them.
Because we want you to learn a few things we've had to learn the hard way.
Like, if you think you're too smart to get sucked into something culty, you're already prime recruitment material.
You might even already be in a cult.
Oops. You better keep listening to find out.
Welcome to Season 6 of A Little Bit Culty. Welcome back, everybody. This is an episode, ironically, that we had scheduled before the October 7th attack on Israel. And this is important to me. And yeah, I'm still pretty raw about it all. There was so much to talk about with our guest, Yasmine. There is her story, which I first read about in her book, Unveiled, which I cannot recommend enough. We will be posting that in our Goodreads account.
Also, it happened at the perfect time. Just time in terms of, worldly matters too. But one of the things too, it's like a lot of times when we're telling these people's story, it's happened to them already, or they've just gotten out. This is one of our first conversations where like, hey, our conversation pertains precisely to what's going on in the world right now. Not that the others don't, but like in terms of like how the news, it literally just happened and she's on our docket.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting time for it and great perspective and one of the more interesting conversations we've had just because it's charged with that backdrop.
Yes.
Right?
A very, very charged one. And if you're noticing that you feel angry with different perspectives, that's totally fine. I'm happy to get a different perspective and to be able to talk freely. And I feel grateful that we have the capacity to talk freely. In not all places of the world can you speak freely, never mind dress freely, etc. And as most of you know, with me and Nippy's story, or if you follow the podcast or you watch The Vow, we always invite survivors and experts to share their experiences with coercive control, high demand groups, organizations, cults of two. We've also looked at religious fundamentalism, especially evangelical Christian fundamentalism, FLDS, Jehovah's Witness. We also talked about Orthodox Judaism. What we haven't touched on is radical Islam. And to be honest, it's daunting. I'll speak for myself. I'm a little scared, especially right now in this very polarized world we navigate.
Today's guest is Yasmine Mohammed. She's a free thinker, a courageous, eloquent writer, podcaster, and human rights advocate for women and children living in Muslim-majority countries. She's the founder and president of Free Hearts, Free Minds. Her memoir, Unveiled, explores her history as a first-generation Canadian woman born into a fundamentalist Islam household and later arranged marriage to a member of Al-Qaeda, having attended Islamic schools and worn a hijab since she was 9 while living in Vancouver.
She's currently hiding from jihadists because, as Free Hearts, Free Minds notes, free thinkers who renounce Islam are ostracized, assaulted, and killed, not just overseas, but on U.S. soil. And just let me be clear, her book kind of says it all. The title is Unveiled, How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. She's brave, beyond brave. And she's here today to talk to us about the dynamics, indoctrination, and dehumanization that happens when fundamentalist religion goes beyond culty to just straight up destructive. And mind you, we are wanting to deep dive into this without also causing any collateral damage to our listeners because we know our listeners represent a broad diversity of faiths. And just like not all fundamentalist Christians are down with somebody like David Koresh or Pat Robertson, and not all Orthodox Jews are down with Lev Tahor, aka the Jewish Taliban, Certainly, not all Muslims and not even all fundamentalist ones stand for hate. This is all more nuanced and complicated than any 1 or 2 hours of a podcast could delve into.
And as we all know, Sarah and I aren't PhDs in geopolitics, so we're probably going to stumble and it's probably going to be a little bit messy, but that's how you have the hard conversations.
And that is kind of the point of this podcast, to have unscripted conversations from the heart to make the kind of space that leads to understanding. So if and when we fuck up, well, just be kind. Here's our chat with Yasmine Mohammed. Yasmine Mohammed, welcome to A Little Bit Culty.
Thank you so much.
This has been a long time coming, and I was trying to tell Nippy, I can't actually remember how we originally connected. Was it Twitter? Did we connect on Twitter?
I think so.
X.
And then we exchanged books, and then I heard you on Jordan Harbinger, and I was like, we got to get this woman on. This is important. And by the way, we just re-listened to that to prep for this. You speak of things in that from a year ago that are detailing exactly what is happening right now.
Yeah. It's just repeating itself.
Yeah, you were right on the mark there, and probably everyone else was like, okay. I actually remember thinking, wow, she's pretty riled up. I don't think I realized how accurate, I mean, I didn't realize. I was like, wow, she's really in it. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't discard it, but I didn't take it seriously.
That's exactly like, okay, so there was a publisher who I had sent my book to, and he loved it, and he was so excited, and he tried to get it published. And he couldn't do it because nobody could see what I was trying to say.
Ugh.
And so he wrote me a note now, and he's like, now the world sees what you've been trying to say. Like, now they get it. But they couldn't get it when I was trying to get your book published. And it's kind of what you were saying, Sarah. Like, I just looked like I was overreacting. But that's what happens when people don't get it. Like you, both of you, as whistleblowers, I'm sure people felt the same way. I mean, I saw that in the documentary. When you first went to the FBI and whatever, they're like, whatever.
Looks consensual.
Yeah.
For our audience, we're going to really try to focus on your story and what happened to you and your book, which is unbelievably harrowing and brave and heartbreaking and so many things. As you know, since you know our podcast, normally we talk about like how do people get in? How do they people like the cult, like what sucked them in? I want to just backtrack for a second to set the stage. You had this story that was incredibly abusive and awful and everything, but you were very quiet about it. But then you saw a show with Bill Maher.
Oh, Bill Maher and Ben Affleck, which on my journey of just figuring out how the ecosystem works politically and all that stuff was one of the things that showed up on my radar probably like 3 or 4 years ago.
What was that story and what happened?
So they had a writer on their show. His name is Sam Harris, and I'd never heard of him. And he was speaking with Bill Maher, and the two of them were talking about how frustrating it is that as liberal Americans, when they're talking about topics that are important to them, somehow their fellow liberal Americans get really irritated and they want to shut down the conversation if it comes around Muslims or Islam. And so to illustrate his point, Sam talked about a recent survey from Egypt that asked, do you believe that people who renounce their religion, people who renounce Islam, people who basically decide to not be Muslims anymore, do you believe that they should be executed? And something like 86% of the respondents said, yes, they should be executed. So currently in about 15 countries across the world, Muslim majority countries, you can be executed for leaving the religion. But Egypt isn't one of those countries. In Egypt, you don't get killed, you get put in an insane asylum instead. So these people polled were saying, no, we should actually just kill them. And it was a moment for me of, when people talk about like being seen and heard, I had that moment of like, oh, I'm being represented. Like, here I am, half Egyptian. I have renounced Islam. And I knew all of this to be true, but it was really, really cool to see these two men on HBO talking about us as if we mattered, And so here I am just about to start getting like excited, and Ben Affleck jumps in and he's like, you're both racist, you're Islamophobic, you're this, you're that. And he shut down the conversation. So it was like this perfect little microcosm of like the problem. And the problem is that we can't even talk about the problem. when it comes from an Islamic or Muslim context, suddenly it's like, that's the no-go zone. That's the sacred cow. And what that's doing, of course, is it's leaving the victims of that ideology forgotten because people are too concerned about defending the ideology versus defending the people who are being hurt by it.
Precisely. And leave it to a Hollywood actor to do that.
Thanks, Ben Affleck. I love that you thanked Ben Affleck in your book. I love that you thanked him. Can you hold up your copy of your book for a second? Do you have it handy? Can you read the title?
It's called Unveiled: How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to get back to that topic at the end. And first, let's hear your story. And I really want to emphasize to our audience that this book really opened my eyes and educated me in a way that I didn't realize I needed. So I think it's very important. And we're going to be skimming to the key points in the book, not covering your whole story because you can't do that in an hour anyway, but just really honoring what you've dedicated your life to now, which is the freedom of women, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think women are the most hurt under the ideology, but freedom of anybody who's suffering under it.
So let's start with, you didn't choose this, right? This is not a cult, dare I say, we'll get into that later, that you signed up for. Your mom brought you into it. Can you give us the background that's necessary to understand how you, as a 6-year-old in Canada, got pulled into radical Islam from your mom?
So from watching all of the cult documentaries that I've watched, it turns out that my mom is actually not that unique in that she was a single mom looking for community, looking for support. Her and my dad had lived in San Francisco together. They had just moved to Canada, to Vancouver, and she'd started a new job and she's got 3 kids and their marriage fell apart and she just felt overworked and isolated. And I'm pretty sure she was going through depression. And so she went to the local mosque, not necessarily because she was religious, because she wasn't, but because she was just looking for community. And when she was there, the caretaker of the mosque was the man that she ended up marrying. So he was already married, already had 3 children, and he took my mom on as his second concurrent wife. So technically that's against the law in Canada, but his first wife was his legal wife, and my mom was just his Islamic wife. And they kept that from us when we were kids because it was against the law and they didn't want to get in trouble. So we just called him uncle. And he was just like a very close family friend initially. And when he came into our lives, it was really weird how my mom just capitulated to everything that he said and did. Like that bothered me even as a little girl. I was like, why are you letting him do that? Like he declared that music is forbidden. Music is haram.
What is haram?
It's forbidden.
Okay.
It's against the religion. And so, my mom used to love listening to country music. She had like Dolly Parton, Kenny Rogers. He took all of her records.
She was second, yeah.
She was a totally normal human being pre this guy.
Yeah.
Even though she grew up in Egypt, which would be a lot more conservative than it would be obviously in San Francisco in the 60s or in Vancouver, she was still secular. And so he took her records and he was breaking them. Like he's breaking all of her records and he's handing them to us and he's telling us to break her records too. And I remember feeling so upset for her. Like if my brother walked into my room and took my Barbies and started breaking them, like I would be livid. But she just stood there and she just took it. It was like this indication to all of us that he's going to do these things and we have to just accept it. He was a very violent man. My mom started wearing hijab, started demanding that we all memorize the Quran, which is the Islamic holy book. And it needs to be memorized in order to be able to do the prayers, which need to be done 5 times a day. And so if we didn't memorize the surahs, the chapters that we had to memorize, we would get beaten, we would get whipped, or if we missed a prayer. And I hated it. I hated him. I hated how everything in my life had changed. Suddenly, my best friends down the hall, Chelsea and Lindsay, I wasn't allowed to play with them anymore because they're non-Muslims. Not allowed to go to birthday parties anymore because birthdays are forbidden. Not allowed to listen to music, not allowed to go swimming, not allowed to ride my bike. Like everything is like forbidden, 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 forbidden.
This podcast wouldn't happen without our amazing, supportive, generous patrons. Are you with us? Come find us over on Patreon at patreon.com/alittlebitculty for bonus episodes, exclusive content, and the occasional Zoom with our fan favorites from our past episodes. It's a lot of fun over there, people.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
That's the sound of your current hype level at the gas pump. But brace yourself for something fuel-nominal, because Unleaded 88 is about to take the hype to a whole new level. Unleaded 88 is cheaper, cleaner, and greener than regular unleaded. Plus, it's homegrown, making Unleaded 88 the clear choice at the pump and totally worth the hype. So pump it up with Unleaded 88, brought to you by Iowa Corn.
You've heard from our sponsors. Now let's get back to A Little Bit Culty, shall we?
Is it accurate saying that the bike riding isn't allowed to protect the female hymen?
That is absolutely correct. As crazy as that sounds. There's a Saudi Arabian movie out, if any of your listeners are interested. It's called Wajda, Wadja. And the whole movie is about this 10-year-old girl who just wants a bicycle. Like she tries so hard. She joins this competition at school that the prize is to win a bike. And she's just obsessed with wanting to ride a bike. And everybody in the neighborhood and her mother, everybody is trying to prevent her from riding a bicycle. That's the whole movie. Can you imagine having a movie about just a girl wanting so hard to ride a bike and all of these obstacles, right? Her principal at school, her family, her neighbors, everybody, nobody wants her to ride a bike. The girl just wants to ride a bike. And yeah, the idea is that it could break your hymen and then you won't be a virgin anymore. And then nobody's going to want to marry you. So it's the same reason why girls can't, ride horses and all sorts of other sports just in general is frowned upon, because then you can damage your hymen, which is the most important part of a girl. So I don't know how they're riding bikes, Sarah, honestly, but that's a fear.
Those Westerners and their bikes.
Oh my goodness. There's so many problems here. And we'll get more into that shortly. And listen, I don't want you to have to recount the details of your abuse growing up. I don't feel like it's necessary. I don't want to re-traumatize you. And for those who want to know and really feel and go along that journey, read the book.
I think the more relevant is you're in Canada.
Yeah.
You're in the Western culture.
Yeah.
And there's a system in place that's being used and even leveraged to protect it, which is, one of the things that we're running across in almost all our episodes. It's how does that happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We talked about this when I was on your podcast, Yasmine, about how we grew up not probably miles from kilometers from each other and in the same era. And I'm riding my bike and you're in a basement, living as a second-class citizen, being abused by your psycho uncle, and your mom's collecting welfare checks, and the government either turns a blind eye, but probably the most shocking and upsetting part for me, on top of the abuse, obviously, is when a kind teacher, who also wrote the foreword of your book, and I love him, finally gets you to talk to the authorities. What does the judge say after you risk everything, by the way, to tell somebody?
He said that this is your culture, This is your family's way of disciplining you. And so, although it may be different and more extreme than your average Canadian family, he wasn't going to intervene because it was what was normal to them.
So in essence, the judge says, we have standards and practices that we adhere to in the Western culture.
Mm-hmm.
They don't apply to your religion.
Mm-hmm.
So your religion usurps the standards and practices of our Western culture.
Absolutely correct. And that is really the biggest problem.
That was explicit in the trial?
He didn't use those words exactly, but yeah, basically he was telling me, if you were any other Canadian girl, if your family had come from France or Germany or Denmark or whatever before immigrating to Canada, then there would be a certain expectation that they wouldn't treat you like this, that they wouldn't harm you like this. But because your family comes from Egypt and your background is Arab and your background is Muslim, then this is what is culturally appropriate for their culture. So that's why it's being excused. So that's why I was being left to continue to be abused, because my family happened to come from an ethnicity or a culture where it's acceptable. So therefore, I need to accept it too. So Canada what's the point of having laws at that point? We are a multicultural country. That's the same thing they kind of do with like female genital mutilation, which is a very common practice in many parts of the Muslim world. And it should be criminalized in Canada. People should be prosecuted for it. But instead, there's that sort of like, oh, but that's their culture. Oh, but that's how they do things. And that's a big problem.
Think this is a result of, or a problem of, the judge not wanting to take on that fight of, we want to be open, we want to have everyone have their religious practices, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think's informing that? And I think that's a good question for the overall, how the liberal, I don't want to say liberal because I think the definition's been kind of messed with and whatever, but whatever the
trying to be
failure.
Progressive.
But I want to inform without inflaming people and getting canceled for saying it's not liberal per se, because I would consider myself progressive in the sense of, I see something wrong, I would do something about it. But I think those words have different meanings.
And we're going to get into the language later.
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. But for the sake of your message, what do you think inspires the failure there?
I do believe it, like, quote unquote, comes from a good place, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah. Right.
I really do believe that the judge thought that, so I have a saying for my fellow Canadians. I say their minds are so open that their brains have fallen out. So this is an example of that. The judge was trying to be so open-minded, so culturally accepting, that he ended up being viciously racist, basically, towards me, and saying, because of your race, because of your ethnicity, I'm going to treat you differently than I'll treat any other young girl in my courtroom.
Oh, the irony.
Yes, exactly.
Do you think that would happen today? Like, this was in the 80s. If this case was brought now, do you think the same thing would happen?
I know the same thing would happen because the same thing does happen. People are contacting me all the time, telling me about things that have happened. There is a young girl from Syria in Nova Scotia who her father punched her in the face, broke her nose because he saw that she had been texting with a boy, and child services would not take her out of the home.
What?
Wow.
They said he lost his temper or whatever. He was upset, and
Who do we write to? What do we need to do right now?
I think we're talking to the right person.
Okay, so is there anything else about, normally we say, what were the red flags along the way that you didn't see as problems, but were there any other key moments that stood out for you in your childhood? There are things that you want to share with our audience that are important to understand the full picture.
So key moments for me that made me start to feel like sad that I was part of this group were just, first and foremost, being a girl. So the restrictions that are put on you are numerous. Obviously, at 9 years old, when they put the hijab on me, which is the cloth over your head that's like tied in a knot under your, like at your throat, just sucks your childhood away from you. Your childhood's already so limited. It's already so short. And they reduce it even more by telling you you're a woman now, you're ready to be married. And now you have to learn how to be an obedient wife. You have to learn how to cook. You have to learn how to clean. You have to learn how to keep your eyes down and don't ask questions. That was my biggest thing, was asking questions. When I would hear stories about our wonderful prophet Muhammad, who we must all revere, was 53 years old when he married a 6-year-old girl. I was absolutely horrified. Like, that is the most disgusting thing I've ever heard. And my mom was like, how dare you? He didn't consummate it until she was 9. I'm like, that makes no difference. Like, this is horrific. And she's like, I was the bad person. Like, I was the bad person for thinking that was horrible and wrong and gross. And, I got told off all the time just for asking questions about things that I felt didn't make sense to me, or that I didn't agree with, or that I didn't want to do. I was told that was the devil whispering in my ear. That the devil whispering in my ear was causing me to doubt. And I had to have stronger faith in order to stop the doubts. And I couldn't stop them. So instead, I just stopped talking. I just kept them inside.
I imagine, so you're going to school and you're being exposed to Western lifestyle at this point. And one of the things that struck me about your story is, with those doubts and being in both worlds, how did you reconcile and how did you compartmentalize, and ultimately how did you transcend it?
That was really tough, actually, because, I went for some of my schooling, I was in Islamic schools. And then for this year that my teacher approached me, that was my first year of high school, because there was no Islamic high school yet. And so that was my first year in public school. And because I spoke out, because I spoke to my teacher, and because I, tried to get this guy arrested, basically, I was taken out of school. So the next year I had to just stay home. So it was this constant reminding me that it's us and them. And I was supposed to love us and hate them. But I kept on not getting it right. I kept on not hating them enough. How could I go to the them for help from the us? It's like, if you're part of the mafia, you're the rat. Like,
Right.
You went to the others to ask for help. So I always looked at the others and was like, I would love that. I would love to be able, like, I used to look at women who had their hair up in a bun, and I'd be like, you don't even know, like, you're so lucky that you could do anything you want with your hair, and you're choosing to put it in a bun. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I was constantly coveting this world around me. I wanted to go to university, which was never going to be an option for me until I made it an option for myself. And now I teach at university. So
Hooray for you.
thank you. I wanted to get a job. I wanted to make my own money. I wanted to live on my own. I wanted all of these things that were going to be totally unattainable. So I spent a lot of time in my own head, just dreaming, wishing, hoping, visualizing. So yeah, the us versus them, like, training or
Indoctrination.
whatever the word is. Yes, indoctrination, exactly. That didn't take for me, because I saw the thems were kind to me. They were kinder to me than the us's were.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't making any sense. So yeah, that was a big frustration for my mom, that I wouldn't just, she thought, like, she felt like I was just a traitor, and I always betrayed my people and stuff like that. But I never felt guilty about it. I just wanted it for myself. But I never thought it would be possible. But once I had my daughter, I was like, no, she will have this life. She will be free. There's no way I'm going to let her live the same way I've lived.
And I want to get to that in a minute, how that helped you wake up. Before that, can you share a little bit about what you talk about in your book regarding marriage and coercion in this faith?
Yeah. So what's most telling is that the woman doesn't even need to be, or the girl doesn't even need to be present at her own wedding. It can be completely done between the groom and her father, or whoever her mahram is, like whoever her male guardian is, whether that be her father or her brother or her uncle or whoever. And you're familiar, of course, with my podcast because you've been on it, but I've had guests who have had the same experience. One of them was in America, where she just wasn't even there when her family married her off when she was 17. So yeah, you're so irrelevant in a marriage. Like the girl, the bride is like completely irrelevant. So for my personal experience, I have to sort of backtrack a little bit and tell you that when I was 17 and I had finished high school, my whole family went to Egypt on a holiday. And then I woke up one morning and they were all gone. They just left me. And I was left in Egypt because my mom felt that it was a society that was more closed. And so that I might be easier to control me, because out in the Western world, I was constantly looking out at the feminists and the liberals and going, I want to be one of you. But if I'm in a Muslim majority world, then there's nothing to covet. And so when I was there, they tried to get me married off to one of my cousins, and that didn't take. I got out of Egypt before that happened, but it really put a huge strain on my mom's relationship, and it really embarrassed her that everybody in the family knew that I was defying her. And so the next step after that was for her to marry me off to somebody that she had chosen. And it goes back to that term that you introduced to us when you're on my podcast, Sarah, coercive choice. So I was like told, this is the man that we want you to marry. And if you don't marry him, you're not my daughter. I want nothing to do with you. Don't come to my funeral. I'm going to kick you out of the house. I'll never love you.
Yeah, bounded choice from Yanya Love.
Bounded choice. Sorry.
No, same thing.
It was through a lot of like emotional blackmail and manipulation, and me really just giving in the end, because I was so sick and tired of having such a bad relationship with my mom. I just wanted her to love me. I wanted her to be proud of me. I wanted her to be happy with something that I had done. And so she told me later that she chose this man because he was strong enough to control me. She'd chosen a terrorist. He was an Al-Qaeda terrorist. And I didn't know it at the time. It wasn't until I was contacted by CSIS, who are like the Canadian CIA. And yeah, at that point, I already had a daughter with him. And he's now in prison in Egypt.
For more background on what brought us here, check out my page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, and at most bookstores. And if you want to see that story in streaming form, you can watch both seasons of The Vow on HBO.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
Brace yourself for something fuel nominal. Unleaded 88 is the clear fuel choice. It's cheaper, cleaner, and greener. And it's grown by Iowa corn farmers. Now that's totally worth the hype. So pump it up with Unleaded 88.
Break time's over, people. Let's get back to this episode of A Little Bit Culty. It's a good one. We're obviously skipping some huge chunks of the story. It's so hard. No. But for the sake of our time and covering the key points, can you describe how you woke up? What was it like having a daughter and recognizing how wrong it was the way your mother had treated you that caused you to snap out of it?
When I had my daughter, it made me realize that the intense love and desire to protect my daughter, that my daughter didn't do anything to deserve it. She just had to be. And that was a huge moment of revelation for me, because my whole life I felt like I needed to be better. I wasn't good enough. And that's why my mom didn't feel those feelings towards me. And then I realized, like, wait, my mom just never felt this way about me. And then it kind of took the blame. Well, not really the blame, but it took the intense desire to keep working, to keep trying to feed this black hole, and maybe one day it'll be enough. You know, it made me realize, like, okay, that is a complete waste of time. That's not getting me anywhere, because she just does not have whatever it is that I have towards my daughter.
Or capable of it.
Yeah. And so that didn't make me necessarily leave the religion, but it made me want to get out of that marriage, away from that man and away from my mom. And through a long series of convoluted events that I won't get into, I eventually was able to get away from both of them. And that's when I started going to UBC. And when I was at UBC, I took a course called History of Religions. And I took it simply because it was going to be about the 3 Abrahamic religions. And I already knew Islam inside out because my mom was the head of the Islamic Studies department at the Islamic school. And so we had to be really good at Islamic studies. Otherwise, we would shame her. So I was like, you know what, this will be an easy A. So that's why I took the course, not thinking that it was going to completely change the trajectory of my life. And so while I was in that course, being intellectually bombarded with all of this information, being allowed to critically think and critically analyze this religion for the first time in my life, because asking questions is frowned upon, is punished, is just not allowed. 9/11 happened. 9/11 happened at the same time. And so then I was bombarded emotionally as well as intellectually. And that's when I realized that I don't want to be a part of this religion anymore. I don't want to be a part of this group. I don't want to be a part of people who think that this is okay. Not only think it's okay, celebrate it. Celebrate the deaths of these innocent Americans. And I just didn't want to be associated with it anymore. So I wanted to take off my hijab because I didn't want people to get the impression that I was part of this group, because I was ashamed to have ever been part of it. And that was the moment when the relationship with my mom and I was completely severed, because she was just so horrified that I would take off my hijab.
Wow. There was a lot of separate wake-up moments, like the wake up to get away from your husband, and little sidebar here, just as a, survivor of a different thing. There were so many moments where I was thinking about, like, this is happening to you in Vancouver and I'm not far from you in the timeline. Like, if I could go in a time travel and like extract you, I would have. But also noting that there were some, even though the judge made the mistake and there were so many people who missed it and didn't save you, there were some incredible guardian angels. I felt like that really did come out of the woodwork, including the woman who helped you get a divorce and file for a restraining order in like half an hour. Like those moments, I was just cheering. I really feel like you need to make a movie out of your life, just a sidebar, because this is incredible. But to wrap up this part of the episode, again, many things happen. You woke up in different stages, waking up from the relationship, waking up from the connection to being a Muslim, all these different points along the way. When did you make the connection between what had happened to you and the patterns of indoctrination that occur in cults?
Way too late.
Same here.
I can't even remember. I love documentaries. Like, I'm always watching documentaries, and I can't remember which one it was that started me down the rabbit hole of watching cult documentaries. But I was feeling so validated when I was watching them, because as a cult survivor, you guys, I'm sure will relate to this, you feel so ashamed and stupid, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like when you see other sane people also getting sucked into things and doing nonsensical things, it makes you feel like, oh, thank goodness I'm not alone. Like, this made me start to realize that my brain was hacked. Like, our brains are easily hacked. And first, this moment of realization that, oh my God, I was part of a cult. Like, this is what it was. And then it was after that a period of just forgiving myself, like not being so angry at myself for being so stupid and for not seeing it and for not walking away and for la da 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 da.
You humanize yourself.
Yeah. I had to do it for other people first. Like, I did it for all of these random strangers on my screen. And then I finally was able to like do it for myself. And it kind of helped me to see my mom too, because it's just so common. Like the single mom is like, it's like a trope. They get pulled into it all the time.
And you described it pretty well, like what was going on with your mom that made her susceptible to it. So.
Yeah. And I finally discovered Dr. Stephen Hassan, and then I went through the whole bite model with him. And it's like my whole page is like green. It's like I experienced all of these markers for what determines what a cult is. I remember watching the Scientology one with Leah Remini and just being like, I think maybe that was one of the moments. Like, it was late. It was really late, you guys, before I finally realized, like, whoa, this is so similar to what I went through. Because we talk about religions completely separately than we talk about cults. And so that was the line for me, was I hadn't really made the connection. But even within religions, there are cults.
Yeah, and cultic behavior. And, we've covered fundamentalist Christianity here. We've covered not even radical, right-wing, Hasidic or anything, just even Orthodox Judaism. We covered a little bit. So more there, but we've not touched this.
And this is the thing that, like Sarah and I were talking beforehand, we have a lot of people writing us about a lot of things. And the behaviors that are coming out of the extreme Islam is like painstakingly obvious.
Yeah, textbook.
And we haven't received anything on it, and it hasn't been on our radar for 3 years until it rears its head. So,
which we will save for the next episode and get into that.
Before you move on, I just want to tell you that you do have listeners, though, that are growing up, that are living in Muslim households, that are listening to your podcast, and that are having their aha moments because they contact me and tell me about it.
That's great.
Will you share here what you shared on yours?
Yeah. So I have an organization called Free Hearts, Free Minds, which helps people who have renounced Islam. Like we have group sessions, individual sessions, we have community support. And I got to meet her in real life. And one of the first things that she told me was that she was really excited that I was going to have Sarah on my podcast, because it was through listening to a little bit culty, listening to other people's stories, that she started to connect those dots. And she realized, like, oh my God, I'm in a cult. Like, she had that moment because she was listening to your podcast.
Amazing.
And then she started going down the rabbit hole of following Dr. Stephen Hassan and learning all about it and yada, yada. And that's what led her to my organization. And now she's like a completely different person than she was when she had heard that episode.
Fantastic.
That makes me so happy. And I hope I get to meet her. I feel like our audience is so educated now that I don't even have to say it, but just to sort of recap some of the things that were obvious. Process-wise, like not being able to question.
They rhyme.
Yeah, they rhyme. Being isolated, the us versus them, the instilling of fear, the loaded language, which we're going to get into.
It's good to hear, like, we are a stopgap between, like, Stephen Hassan and you, right? Because I think because we're not a religion, our story's kind of in the middle of those things, people hear ours, and if they want to know more, they go to the experts. And ultimately, if they're going to you and Stephen Hassan, I think we've done our job in terms of being a great conduit to people getting the education they need.
Yeah, it's safe to listen to your podcast because it doesn't feel like it's being pointed at them.
A little bit cold.
You know what I mean?
Just a little bit. Just a little bit. I mean,
there's looking things that may or may not be culty.
No, just have a taste. You know? Just see if it's culty. If not, turn it off, right?
Ben Affleck.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did we miss anything that you feel it's important to know? And we will put your organization on our resource page so that if anyone listening needs that support, they can connect with you. And obviously all of your credentials. Where can people find you? What's the best way to reach out and connect with you?
I'm on X, formerly known as Twitter, under Yasmine Mohammed. And I'm also on Instagram and on Facebook. You can also contact me through my website, yasminemohammed.com. That's about it.
Great. If there's anyone listening who feels that they are wanting to unfollow us or that we are being racist or whatever, do you have any words of wisdom for those people who might be riled up?
That hurts. Yeah, that is painful to me that people feel like our stories, like the people like me who have renounced Islam, like that us sharing our stories is like so bad that the platforms that give us voices are demonized as well. Like it's just so inhuman for people to even have that thought, you know? Mm-hmm. Like you can bring cult survivors from all walks of life and they're all listened to and they're all lauded and they're all celebrated and they're all appreciated. I'm sorry, this is like really emotional for me because it's hurtful. It's just hurtful that not only is it difficult for us to get our stories out because we are risking our lives. We are the only ones that are risking our lives to blow this whistle. So it's so difficult already, but you get through all of those obstacles and you're like, no, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And then you speak out and then you get attacked by your so-called progressive, liberal, open-minded people on the left that are supposed to be embracing free expression and embracing your freedom of mind. They're the ones that are honestly, sometimes just as aggressive as the other side. They're not as violent, obviously, but they can be just as mean. It's shocking and it's hurtful.
Yeah, they're violent with their words.
And just to point out for our listeners, like a couple episodes ago, we talked to survivors from Shiny Happy People, and everyone's, outraged with Bill Gothard playing, footsies with the victims as they're praying. And that's obviously like wildly inappropriate, and everyone suffered different types of abuse and trauma in that space. And can they go, wow, this is like, it's almost like they close their eyes when Islam is involved, right? Like the atrocities on the scale. Horrific.
Why is that, though? Why
I don't want to say what happened to you as a child, but when you describe the abuse that you endured, I mean, it is above and beyond anything I've ever heard of a child, and it makes me want to find that judge.
It's the worst of all the ones that we've listened to.
Yeah, it's the worst. And again, like, this is not the trauma Olympics. We're not trying to, put down. Everyone's endured different types of trauma. I just feel like there's not the appropriate outrage with what you endured. And I love what you said. Your minds are trying to be so open that our brains fall out. It's one of the things that makes me the least proud to be a progressive Canadian when I see that, to be totally honest. And I assume you feel the same way. So thank you all for listening. Thank you, Yasmine, for your truth, for your bravery. You're literally, nobody knows where you are, right? Because you need to protect yourself. Mm-hmm. This is a next level of bravery, and I really applaud you for that.
And writing a book.
Thank you very much. You like what you hear? Please do give us a rating, a review, and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen. Every little bit helps us get this cult awareness content out there. Smash that subscribe button. You know what to do. I really feel like a 1-hour interview does not do this book justice, or Yasmine's life, her struggle, justice. I cannot recommend it enough. It was a real eye-opener. Listening to it, especially on Audible, in Yasmine's voice, was really moving for me. And I can't thank her enough for her time on our podcast. And thank you for supporting A Little Bit Culty. Stay safe, everybody, and be kind.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We're heading over to patreon.com/alittlebitculty now to discuss this episode. In the meantime, dear listener, please remember, this podcast is solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. It's not intended as a substitute for real medical, legal, or therapeutic advice. For cult recovery resources and to learn more about seeking safely in this culty world, check out alittlebitculty.com/culty resources, and don't miss Sarah's TED Talk called How Cult Literate Are You? Great stuff.
A Little Bit Culty is a Trace 120 production, executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, in collaboration with producer Will Rutherford at Citizens of Sound and our co-creator and show chaplain/bodyguard, Jess Temple Tardy. Our show writer is Holly Zadra, and our theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities. At Macy's,